why don't you have a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem. I received some excellent questions again this week that I think are definitely fun. I was looking for a word. I think they're fun, but I also think these are questions that a number of people may actually have. Not just one person may have, but a lot of people may have. So, let's do this straight away. Question number 1. What, I'm paraphrasing, often abbreviating the question a little bit, right? What's the purpose of the metal coil in some converters? Doesn't have to be a coil. Can also be a little metal ball that's in the converter. It's a very good question. When you look at cartridges, they typically have a ball in them as well. Not always. Typically, think of Standard International, little plastic ball. I remember them from school. But look at anything. Parker, Waterman, think of Platinum, have a big metal ball in them. Why is that there? Well, it's a seal that closes the ink, right? And then you puncture it. But you're not talking about, the person who asked was not talking about cartridges. He was talking about converters. Well, there's a second function. Even in whether it's in the cartridge or in this case in the converter, it's the sole function. And that is, it's an agitator. In the, what do we call that? Physical sense of that word. What can happen is that in an ink reservoir, ink develops a surface tension. You may have experienced this. I can't really simulate it. I don't know if I have. Is this a converter that might do that? I think it's pretty full. Yeah, no, this is too full. As you can see, I am dreadfully prepared here. I think this one is a little emptier. I'm sorry, I just want to see if I can show you. Okay, here we have ink in a converter. Now, if I don't know if this converter will do it. There's no ball or coil in it. No, it's not going to do it. Maybe, and I don't even think it will matter if I do it very slowly. No. Okay, so that was a great demonstration that utterly failed. #science. Think about what can happen though. You have an ink reservoir. You may have seen it at some point, and you tilt it. Your pen runs dry, right? You're writing with it, your pen runs dry, you open up the barrel of the pen, and you see that the ink is not actually in the bottom part of the converter, but in the top part, stuck to the top of the converter. And when that happens, your pen won't write, because obviously when the ink is stuck at the top, it's not going to flow into the feed, nib, etc., and then onto the paper. So some companies, sorry, I nearly choked there. Tea is a solution for everything. Some companies put an agitator in the converter or cartridge, but because the question was about converters, I'll just talk about converters from now on. So that surface tension that keeps the ink stuck to the top of your converter is broken. And then all you need to do is that, right? Agitator, ink is stuck here. Agitator falls down, agitator goes back down. And that surface tension is broken and the ink flows back to the nib end of the pen again. And you can continue to write. Now, the problem with balls. Let's talk about the problem of having balls in your converter. The problem with balls, you see those in Parker converters. That's one converter that comes to mind. There's a Parker slide type converter that at least used to come with a metal ball in it. It works very well because those are relatively heavy balls. It works relatively well in breaking that surface tension, but converter section nipple goes into the converter, and at the top there's an opening, and that ball was quite big, and the ball can actually block that opening. And then you don't have surface tension, but you also don't have much of an ink flow because that ball is blocking that converter. I have had that happen in the past. So the brilliant solution is a coil, because a coil is open and it will not close off, right, the converter. So I probably could have explained that in less than 5 minutes, but I wanted to be complete. and I hope that this is a clear answer to your question. It breaks surface tension and in such a way with the coil that it won't disrupt ink flow. Next question. I'm writing down timestamps should you wonder. Basically the question here was, do you have experience with extended use of permanent inks? Are there specific safety concerns or special maintenance requirements when using permanent inks? I don't use a lot of permanent inks because I don't necessarily think that my grocery list needs to be kept for posterity. But having said that, I'm not making fun of this because I understand that there are people who have such needs. Think of lab journals, specific records that actually are important, which is why in the United Kingdom, I think it is still the case that official documents are signed with iron gall ink, which is as permanent as it gets. Now, iron gall ink, that is a whole different matter altogether. Iron gall ink has been shown to melt fountain pen feeds. You can find pictures online. I have used a number of iron gall inks. I've never had that issue. Not a single time. In different pens. Cheaper feeds, more expensive feeds. I mean, I don't know if there's really much of a difference, but I mean, feeds of expensive pens, feeds of cheaper pens. Bear in mind, Montblanc Midnight Blue used to be an iron gall ink. Now, if Montblanc thinks it's safe for their pens, just saying. But having said that, I would say certain things do come into place. Are there specific issues with permanent inks? As long as you use a fountain pen ink of a reasonable brand, and there are reasonable brands that make permanent inks. Montblanc had their permanent inks. Rohrer und Klingner. De Atramentis as document inks. These are well-known ink brands that I would feel safe to use in a fountain pen. Having said that, it's a permanent ink. And you clean, they're water resistant, and you clean your pen with water. Again, I don't think it's an issue as long as you practice good pen hygiene. To me, I clean a pen when its ink reservoir, whether that is a cartridge or most often, in my case, a converter, sometimes a piston. Whenever that's dry, the pen gets cleaned. This is an Lambrou Pens LB6. It always has the same ink in it. And yet, because it's a red ink, very saturated red ink, Montblanc Corn Poppy, when this pen is dry, I clean it until clear water comes out. Then I let it dry and ink it up with the same ink. Is that necessary? Probably not. It's not a permanent ink. It would probably be fine if I would clean it, and this is not a hard and fast rule, I'm just saying, every 3, 4 or 5 inkings up. Will I take that risk? No. Is the pen likely to melt from Montblanc Corn Poppy Red? Probably not. But I do this for all my pens. I just really like to clean them. Not because I like the act so much, but I just want to make sure that I clean my pen. And I think for a permanent ink, it's the same thing. No India ink, no white out, none of that. Fountain pen inks. But if you put them in, you want to use permanent inks, I think it's fine. Again, I've just given you a few brands. Those are brands I would stick with. But there are other brands that they may or may not be safe. These are brands that I've all used, that I've had good experiences with. But make sure to clean your pen. And that's it. Beyond that, safety issues. The standard answer I always give to the safety of inks is this. Yes, I have had pens destroyed by certain inks. Yes, this is true. These were noodless inks. That does not mean that every noodless ink will destroy pens, but some inks have. Okay. Many noodless inks are fine, right? Those inks were not. Okay. These were not permanent inks. They were just boutique inks. Other people have had stories like that with private reserve inks. Other people have had stories like that with iron gall inks. But again, iron gall inks are a bit of a different beast because those are very specific inks. If this concerns you, then you must use washable blue. This is not. I'm not trying to harp on or dig. This is not a dig at anyone. This is definitely not a dig at the person who asked the question. I'm just saying, if you are this concerned about, say, discoloration of a pen or the section or this, then you have to use washable blue, and then you must stick to that because it's washable blue. It's not going to do anything, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some people do that. Perfectly fine reason in my mind. So I'm just saying, if that really is a concern, like a really serious concern that you don't want anything to happen to your pens, washable blue. And otherwise, experiment, but just clean your pens. Clean your pens, and most likely you'll be fine. Okay, our next question is, I thought this was an interesting one. Some people fill their converters by dipping the entire section. Watson will now impersonate the entire section into a bottle of ink, and then they operate the converter. Others fill a converter or a cartridge by a syringe, right? So you take the whole thing out, you take a syringe, you fill the converter with ink. And not mentioned, but I've also seen that, yet others dip the converter in a bottle of, I should probably be careful with that, dip the converter in a bottle of ink, draw up ink, and then push it or screw it back into the section and use it that way. Will syringe filling eventually lead to leakage due to looseness of the converter in the section? Are there downsides to the syringe method? I found that a very interesting question. I don't know of a lot of people, this is, again, I'm just saying, I don't know of a lot of people who fill a converter with a syringe. I definitely know of people, I'm one of them, who refill cartridges with a syringe, but a cartridge is a cartridge. It's cheap, and if it gets too loose, you throw it out, right? Is that looseness an issue? My very short answer would be yes. At some point it might be, because I have had converters that were used so often that the relatively soft plastic nipple end would break. It would crack, and then there's no more air seal, ink starts to leak, it's not pretty. That can also happen because the converter fell, and that can also happen because the converter was pushed in too violently. All kinds of things can make this happen. But yes, it stands to reason that if you pull something out and put it in and pull it out and put it in and pull it out, etc., at some point it may get loose. It's quite frankly, it's wear and tear. Now let's not forget that the standard converter is about $7 or maybe $10, and that's it. Which is not nothing, but it's not a major purchase. This is not a $1,000 pen that cracked. It's a converter. And some may be a little bit more expensive, some may be proprietary, I understand all that. If you want to be absolutely certain that this looseness, the wear and tear, is not an issue, then I wouldn't use that syringe method, which for a converter I don't really understand anyway, because it has a mechanism to draw up ink. For a cartridge, again, if the cartridge nipple becomes too loose because it stretches out or whatever, you throw it out and you get a new cartridge. A box of cartridges is what, $5? Like, I mean, this is also not a major purchase. More important to me, because I'm here to give sage advice, is think about the mechanism of inking up a pen here. If you dip the section into ink, you draw up ink with the converter, then you saturate the feed from the outside in. And then you wipe down the section, any ink off, nib and feed maybe, that may suck some ink out of the feed. That's why you then expel 2 or 3 drops of ink from the converter. And you saturate that feed again from the inside out. Most often, at least in my experience, you'll find that if you do it that way, that pen will write straight away because the feed has been saturated. Now, if you don't do that, if you take a converter and fill it up with a syringe and put it back into the pen, that won't write straight away because the feed needs to saturate a bit, needs to get some ink in there. If you take the converter, dip it in a bottle of ink, and draw up the ink and then put it back in the section, which is how I started because I didn't know how to use a fountain pen. When I got my first converter filled pen, that was a Waterman Hemisphere, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to use a converter like that. So I thought you had to fill the converter straight in the ink bottle. One lives and learns, right? I'm not ashamed to say this. You live and learn, you make mistakes. But then too, the feed is not saturated. Then, of course, you can put the converter in, expel a few drops of ink, and again, from the inside out, saturate the feed, and it should write pretty quickly. But in my mind, by far the most effective way to do it is dip the section in the ink and draw up ink, and you saturate that feed from the outside in, wipe it clean, squeeze some ink out, inside, out, saturation again, and it writes. Sometimes I don't even need to expel ink because I carefully wipe the section and it writes straight away. The pen writes straight away. So I think this was a very interesting question because it touched upon that issue, right, of different ways to use a fountain pen to get it filled with ink and to make it write as quickly as possible. And this is one of the issues with cartridges, where often you put them in and nothing happens. Because again, the feed needs to saturate. And what my teachers used to do in school, primary school, when we used fountain pens, was they would take out the cartridge, flip out the section, flip it over, put the nipple of the cartridge gently over the nib, squeeze a little bit, and that, through capillary action, now the other way around from what it usually is, ink gets pushed or sucked in between the nib and feed, and the pen writes. I hope I haven't bored you, but I thought this was worth talking about for just a little bit. Final question. How do you clean and maintain ebonite pens? Do you need to wax them? Was a question I received. I think typically ebonite is polished. Raw ebonite, I think, would absorb, I could be wrong, but I think would absorb sweat. I'm not 100% sure, but raw ebonite sounds like, I know how well that would work in a pen, so I think often they are polished, sometimes lacquered. And my shortest answer was, I don't think I've ever really maintained an ebonite pen. I've never waxed pen. There was a time I put Renaissance wax on pens, and then I read an article by, I want to say, Dave Nishimura, who knows a lot about vintage pens and pen restoration. He said you shouldn't do that because it can discolor and then it's hard to get off and you get a disgusting yellow layer on pens. I thought, okay, stop that. Pens meant to be used is my philosophy, and therefore they will be used. And if it develops some micro scratches, it's okay because they're my pens and I use my pens. I have never waxed ebonite. I don't think it's necessary. If anyone in the audience has waxed ebonite, then by all means leave a comment so that the person who asked this question knows. The only thing I would say is ebonite and water don't mix well. So don't leave pen barrels, pen sections, pen caps made out of ebonite submerged in water. Make sure they remain dry. Even if they get water splashed on them, make sure they get dried. I found that especially on vintage pens, I don't know if that has something to do with the ebonite becoming a little brittle, like on a microscopic level, but it can discolor almost instantly when it's submerged in water. I learned that the hard way. So don't do that. Away from water. Alright? But beyond that, I don't think you need to do anything, unless maybe potentially, I don't know, if you live in a climate that is exceptionally dry. I live in an area where, especially in summer, it can be very dry. If you have wooden pens, you might consider a little bit of oil. Ryan Krusak of Krusak Studios has, I think, frequently asked questions or something. He's a master pen maker who works with a lot of interesting woods, and he explains what kind of oil you can use to keep your pens oiled a bit if need be. So I defer to his wisdom. He's the expert on that. You can find it on his website of Krusak Studios. That's Krusac, in case you don't know Ryan Krusak. That's it. But for ebonite, I would say that's just no water. Oh, and don't drop it. ebonite doesn't bounce. It can really shatter. So don't drop it either. Beyond that, I think you should be good. Alright, I hope that was useful. I try to keep these videos to about 20 minutes because I don't want to drone on and on for too long. I hope this was useful. Please leave any other questions you have down below. I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my abilities. If you think I'm an idiot and you disagree with everything I've said, then please let me know as well, and just provide your opinion. If you have any other input, questions, remarks, comments, etc., just leave them below, and I'll see what I can do. Hope this was useful. Glad to see you later. Bye bye.